Welcome to Week 4's video lecture on the sustainability of sport for development and peace programs. I'm going to start by telling you a story. I met an alumni from our program, just a great guy, and so he'd taken sport management, but he'd actually gone into a whole other career, but he still was involved in sport as a coach, etc. And he heard that they needed sport equipment, so he was a soccer coach in Peru. And so he phoned up these tons of soccer programs around Ontario and gathered like a garage full of everything from knee pads to jerseys, and not just jerseys like from one or two kids on a team, but an entire team's jerseys, like every number that you would want. So he had all this equipment, and then he realized he didn't have any way to ship it to Peru. So part of the sustainability of a program is looking at the entire depth and breadth of the program, right from the inception and the idea, and isn't this great, and we're going to send this equipment down, and we know that they need this equipment, and worked incredibly hard to get all of the equipment. And I think he thought in the back of his head, well, you know, Air Canada is going to do this for free. We're going to get a container because I'm doing such great work. But I think Air Canada would go broke if everybody that had a really amazing idea went to them and said, can you please do this for free? So it ended up that he contacted teams. He found out that there was going to be a tournament in Peru where some Canadians were going, and so he got a whole bunch of hockey bags and stuffed the hockey bags, and then, you know, the teammates actually paid to take down the extra luggage. I think Air Canada might have thrown in a few extra, you know, overage bags, and I think a good chunk of the uniforms and everything were taken down, and so, you know, terrific that he was really creative and a problem solver, and, you know, didn't come up to a roadblock and then say, well, I'm just going to give up now. So, you know, but from his experience, I think we all have to learn that, you know, you're taking your program that you're designing all the way through to its fruition, and sustainability is a key part of that. Because maybe it's really great that those kids have those jerseys in Peru, but what if they don't all get recovered by the coach at the end of the season? Of course, they're going to get ripped and torn and stained over the course of, you know, just the wear and tear of the kids. And so what are they going to do in the next season? And now that all of the Ontario clubs have given up their extra soccer jerseys, then do you start going to British Columbia or Alberta or Quebec to get those jerseys? So, you know, is it a sustainable program? It's a great idea. And I think this student was amazing for, you know, at least he's doing something, right? He's trying to help. But it's just a matter of, you know, making sure that you've got that plan at the outset when you get started. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what sustainability looks like based on the work of Lindsay from 2008. Given the complexity of so many community-based programs operating in underserved settings, it can be extremely difficult to sustain programming efforts over time. And that's Whitley et al. And their key statement that speaks to the challenges not only of planning your program from Canada, from here in Niagara, but then the challenges of sustainability in the locale where your program is being offered. So sustainability entails not only what's involved in the program management from potentially your home country, if you're starting your own sport for development program, but also what's needed in the locale where the program is being delivered. So at home, sustainability is the finances, the volunteers, potentially an office? How are you maintaining your website? Do you have continual source of revenue? Do you have corporate partners that you're working with? And then imagine a local setting in a developing country. What about sustaining your volunteers? Maybe you bring volunteers in and you train them, and then the volunteers, maybe they graduate or they go on and they get a full-time job, which is terrific for that volunteer, but it means that you're always having to retrain these volunteers. Maybe you start a partnership with the school, but then the school principal changes after the first year and doesn't want to deliver your program anymore. Maybe you have a local sponsor or a government that really favors the types of programs that you're doing, and then they decide again that maybe the political climate has changed, or that facility has another use, or maybe another program has come along that they think might be better for their children, and so you're then competing with potentially another educational program that they think is important for their children. So sustainability is extremely complicated. Just quickly, another story. So this is the program that we've been working with in the Turks and Caicos Islands and the island of Provinciale, although the school program that we worked with did go on to all of the islands in the country. It's a small country, but it was a local rugby football organization that initiated the program and designed a school program with the main emphasis being trying to encourage the kids to stay in school. And in a second I'll go on to how they did that. But they did that through the sport of rugby. And so they received a $500,000 grant from the QE Scholars, so the Commonwealth Games Foundation, and they were able to bring Brock University students down to 3 terms a year to coach rugby and deliver this programming about stay in school. So after 5 years, they did an evaluation of the program, and even though the rugby club was very committed to the program, they realized that without the Brock students coming down, it was a bit questionable about what the program, if it was sustainable or not. Like, were they going to be able to get local coaches to come in to deliver the same programs that our students did? And essentially they decided that they couldn't. Now, I might disagree with that, but the long and short of it is that the Commonwealth Games Foundation, they stopped their funding. And then the program luckily did not come to a halt, but after 5 years of delivering an amazing program that had won awards, that had government recognition, that had students had received scholarships to sports scholarships to go to school in the United States, the enrollment in school and the graduation rates increased. So all of these other really positive indicators to say that this is a good program, they didn't really matter because they felt that the program wasn't sustainable. So while it was disappointing that the Commonwealth Games Foundation no longer funded the Brock students to go to Turks and Caicos, and the funding went to other programs in other countries in the Caribbean, it's important to realize how important sustainability is. And I think one of the big indicators is when we look at the United Nations. So they tried to rally the globe around the Millennium Development Goals leading up to, of course, the new millennium in 2000. And obviously after that they changed the name, and we now have the Sustainable Development Goals. And this links back to the very first or second lecture that we talked about when we had the Mythbusters, right? And look at the billions of dollars that's spent on development when the programs weren't necessarily sustainable. So now one of the first things that especially funding agencies do is look at what is the long-term plan for your organization, and what are the key elements of that organization that are going to be sustainable or not. So from the United Nations perspective, sport is an easy element to adapt into a development program because it's very cost efficient. Certainly I'll show you in a second, but the kids, you know, we heard from Johan Koss how the most popular kid in town was the one with a long sleeve shirt because they could tie it in a knot and create their own soccer ball. So when the kids are motivated and driven to play sport and they don't have any money, it's great to pull out that long sleeve shirt. Well, I want to show you another little bit of ingenuity and innovation from the kids in Rwanda. So this might be kind of hard for you to see, but it's actually made of plastic bags. And what the kids did was they would take the plastic bags from the food that was delivered from the aid agencies, and they would grab them and they would wrap them and wrap them and wrap them and wrap them until they had a ball. So in Rwanda, this is what the kids would play soccer with, or whichever sport, but it was usually soccer. So I've had this one for about 10 years, so I'm a little bit reluctant to toss it or kick it or anything like that. But, you know, the United Nations recognize that these kids, you know, they don't need Forest gold posts, they don't need jerseys, they don't need all this other equipment. These kids are playing sports now with, you know, literally local resources that they found, or a t-shirt that they have. So, you know, let's think about that, and certainly the United Nations did, and that's why sport is being recognized as one area that's critical to their overall agenda of promoting development and peace. So, you know, what are those elements of sustainability and why is it important? So it's important because we've seen sport for development programs fall apart because of that lack of planning for the long term. So, you know, do they have staff? Do they have trained staff? Another short story, a student of ours was sponsoring a soccer program in his hometown in Kenya. And really amazing program, and what he did was bring out you know, trainers to train the coaches from a local town that was much larger and had a larger soccer program. But then as soon as those kids grew up, then, you know, he lost all of his soccer coaches. And he was trying to, you know, run this from Canada, but liaise with someone who was on the ground in Kenya, and then again trying to, you know, leverage whatever resources he had. So making sure that you have staff that are going to stick with you is absolutely critical, the training that's available and all of the equipment that you need. Partnerships are also critical. So if you have a partner that only signs up for a year or two, well, how great is that? Especially when we saw, even with the Commonwealth Games Foundation, it was terrific that they gave that money, and they continue to give that money, just not to Brock and not to Turks and Caicos. So they're still making a really powerful difference in Africa and in the Caribbean and in South America, but it was just those programs in particular. So you have to think, is it a 5-year window, a 2-year window? How long am I going to have that funding for? And if I've only got, like if that program had you know, known that it was 5 years, and then maybe a year out they would have been able to try to go out and recruit other funders and sponsors, or multiple sources of revenue, not just depending on one corporate partner. Capacity building is really important. So that means, what do you have inside your organization in terms of innovation, business development, the ability to capture new partners, marketing, manage partnerships, like I said, whether it's the Minister of Sport in that country, or the high school principal, or the teacher, the phys ed teacher who's helping you run the program. So do you have people on the ground that have the skills to actually manage all of those partnerships, which are so critical to the longevity of your program? And incredibly important is to have an overall strategic plan. So that's looking at your program for up to 10 years, and then looking at all of the elements of sustainability, and we'll identify those in a minute, that are really key. If you can conceptualize a program that requires minimal funding, then that's obviously ideal. But you know, there tends to be this desire to want to grow your program, especially if it's successful. So, you know, resources will be needed in order to do that. Also key is monitoring and evaluation, and that can take money. So are you going to hire a consulting firm to come and monitor and evaluate your program? So if you are trying to capture a corporate partner to give you potentially $100,000 or $500,000, they're going to want to know whether or not your program is effective. And if you don't have any type of empirical evidence that suggests that there are sustainable outcomes from your program, then, you know, why should the sponsor or partner or funding agency give you the money? So, you know, you might have to pay that money up front in order to get that, you know, evaluation piece. However, how are you going to pay for that? Could you have a partnership with the university, and maybe a student would take it on as a master's program? Now that's a way to maybe get it done for less money, but it's not going to be free. You're still going to have to fly that student over there and pay for their accommodation and food and what have you. So there can be several issues and challenges around developing and operating a sport for development program, and all of these lead back to its sustainability. So now we're going to move on and talk about Lindsay's 4 different levels of sustainability for sport for development programs. When Lindsay was conceptualizing the framework, he looked at, you know, 3 different aspects of sport for development programs. The first one was really the actual design and implementation of the program. So why was that particularly important? Okay, that's important because it affects the participant directly. If the program doesn't have a design that fits, say, the schedule of the children, the age group of the children, the equipment that you have on hand, a particular scheduling of facilities, and you don't have the right people implementing the program, so people who are highly trained, enthusiastic, you know, genuinely care about the children who are in the program, then, you know, are those children going to stay in the program, or would the program have the impact on the children that you're really looking for? The second one is the actual setting. So is it a school? Is it a park? Is it a rugby field? Do you have access to that rugby field at the times when you need it? What if you need maybe a rugby field that also has a classroom? Because what we did in Turks and Caicos was the kids came and played rugby, and then they had an after school sort of like a tutoring session, and they had peer tutoring where the high school kids would tutor the younger children. So they really needed both of these facilities, and over time the rugby club raised the money and they built a clubhouse, then they enhanced the clubhouse so they could really use it as sort of a mock classroom, so that they had the kids coming out and playing and learning the sport, but also enticing them to stay in school and giving them the actual skills to enhance their grades when they were in school. And of course the broader community. So when we were in Turks and Caicos, I met with the Minister of Health, the Minister of Education, the Minister of Finance and Economics, and this was amazing to me that they actually came and met our plane. So they were absolutely thrilled to have the Canadians come down, and the program, as I mentioned, had been going on for a few years, but this was this full, you know, 2-week-long program where we had rugby in the schools every day, lots of afternoon and evening programming, and then we had this massive, sort of the biggest rugby festival ever held in Turks and Caicos on the final day. So I had individual meetings with each one of those ministers. I met with the high school principals at virtually every single school so that I could tell them about our program and ask asked them, so we wanted to come down during Brock's Reading Week. Now it extended beyond that, and students, oh darn, they did miss a bit of school on either end, but we needed to make sure that we would have access to the students when our students were able to come down. There's no point bringing everyone to Turks and Caicos only to find out that the kids are maybe in a testing week when they're not going to be available to us for the programming. So it was the principals, it was the phys ed teachers as well. So it was kind of a little bit, how can I say this, dicey. So the person that oversaw the phys ed programs in all of the schools was funded by FIFA, so by soccer, and he had like every single time I saw him, he was wearing a jersey. It was a soccer jersey that was funded from FIFA, and FIFA actually had a huge training complex down there, and they used to run development programs, and the athletes would come down and stay in one of the resorts, Club Med, and then they'd have these rugby or these soccer development camps. So when he found out that we were there to really promote rugby, you know, he had kind of had his back up a little bit, and we actually made a real effort to sit down and speak with him and explain, you know, the diversity of program development, the importance of that, that some of the skills actually are generalizable across the two sports, and that some kids might rather play rugby, and they didn't have any girls soccer, and the rugby was for girls and boys. So he thought that that was really important, but it was us setting the stage, right? Meeting with all of the people that we needed to meet with to make sure that everything would roll out really well on an ongoing basis. And then when we actually brought the students down, another key thing that we did was we found out that none of the phys ed teachers knew how to play rugby. So that's kind of hard. So we met with the woman who was redoing the entire curriculum for all the schools in Turks and Caicos, and she added rugby onto the phys ed curriculum, so it was included as one of their core sports. And then we found out that the gym teachers didn't know how to teach it. And I think in any environment, if you're a teacher and you're asked to have skills that maybe you don't have, it can be really challenging, especially when you have to teach them. So what we did was bring in top rugby coach trainers and developers from the US, and we brought them down for 5 days, and we paid to fly and bring in and provide all the hotel food, you know, a night out for all of the PE teachers from all across Turks and Caicos, so they all knew how to play rugby, especially the fundamentals of rugby. So, you know, think about all these elements that we had to bring in, and of course we had the Rugby Football Association that helped to pay for this, and of course they had all of the contacts to bring in these really key coaches. So when we were in the Turks and Caicos, we met with the ministers on one hand, who of course would provide the funding and make decisions around the curriculum, and then the phys ed teachers at the other. Now what's interesting is, you know, we might think that that financing is really important and having that sustainable partnership with the government, which it is important, but the child, right? So that implementation and the project design side, it's going to be that phys ed teacher who's going to be the most important, right? If they're knowledgeable about rugby, if they like rugby, if they feel comfortable teaching it and they know those fundamental skills, then the child's going to have that much more of an enjoyable time when they're playing. So what we needed to do is identify this full range of stakeholders, from the project design side to the organizational setting side, and did we have access to the schools, right down to the institutional side, you know, looking at the really big picture of the whole community environment, and you know, what was the level of support that we had there. So all of those were needed in order to put in place the key elements of sustainability. So I chose Lindsay's framework as really a mechanism for you to use when you're looking at sustainability of the Sport for Development program that you'll be evaluating and that you'll be creating, because it's terrific for practitioners and for theorists. So for practitioners, it looks at 4 different levels of sustainability, so that when you're planning your program, you can make sure that right from the program level all the way up to the community level, that you've addressed the key mechanisms that will be enduring for that program and have an enduring impact on the individuals that are part of the program. But it's also great for theorists. So if we're doing an evaluation or research on a program, we need to be able to identify what to evaluate and what the best way to evaluate that is. Is it interviews? Is it a survey? Is it observation? Is it an ethnography? Using this framework really provides both sides of the coin. So right now, we'll tell you about the 4 different levels of the framework, and then I'll go into a little bit more depth on each one. Lindsay's holistic framework looks at individual, organizational, community, and institutional sustainability to really address every different facet of a program for sport for development and peace. For individual sustainability, Lindsay really highlights 2 elements that are concerned. The first one is, do the individuals stay in the program? So there's a program called the Magic Bus, which is an educational program in India, and children who in elementary school join that program, and then they stay through until they graduate from high school, and then they come on board as trainers. So those students are involved in that program for up to 10 years or longer, and they've continued to evaluate and reestablish and redevelop and redesign the program so that they don't ever have to have an opportunity for those kids to say, well, you're not welcome in our program anymore, or we don't have another learning opportunity available to you, because kids can stay embedded in that program and learn new skills really for their entire youth. The second element of individual sustainability looks at the goal achievement of the program in relation to the individual, to the participant. So if the goal is education, then has the child actually learned something? If the goal is conflict resolution, has the participant or the participants in the program, have they learned to resolve conflicts with groups that they might not have dealt with before? They might have a religious or a cultural bias towards a particular group. So maybe it's health. And you're trying to teach, there was a program that Right to Play was doing on oral health, and they were using games to teach children how to brush their teeth in South America. You as a researcher, then you would go back in and you would come up with some way to evaluate whether or not the children had learned about oral health, whether or not students were more accommodating to people that they just met, or groups that they might have had a conflict with before, or if they'd learned a particular educational skill that was new to them. So it's these 2 different types. So we want the children to stay in because they enjoy the program, and we continue to modify that program so that children and adults, youth, remain encompassed within the program. And secondly, does it actually teach the specific educational goals that the program was meant to deliver to the individual? Organizational sustainability really looks at, first of all, the internal workings of the organization. Do you have the right staff? Do you have offices? Do you have the supplies that you need, the resources, what have you? And do you have those on a sustainable basis? If someone lends something to you or says, I'll do a website for you for a year, that's really terrific, but that's not sustainable. So that's what you would look at in terms of that organizational capacity, right? To actually organize and continue to deliver the program on a sustainable basis. The second one is really the viability, and here Lindsay focuses attention on the financial sustainability of the organization. So ideally, the organization would have multiple types of funding. So if you look at some organizations on their websites, they'll have that donor button, right? So right away they're collecting money from their website. They might have corporate partners, they're applying for grants and loans. Some of them might be social enterprises where they have individuals who are part of their program. Maybe they're making jewelry, bracelets, necklaces, or in Niagara-on-the-Lake we have an Africa store where they sell everything from beautiful handicrafts and art pieces and rugs, and through that social enterprise they're also making money that then sustains the organization as well. So here we're looking, what is that, 4, 5, 6 different types of revenue that you're bringing into the organization. So even if you lose one, okay, so maybe you've lost a grant, but you still have other grants, or you have other corporate partners, or you have the social enterprise side of the organization, and that donation button that's on your website, and hopefully you're doing things through social media to drive people to that website or have campaigns around your program. And certainly, the other really great one is to host maybe a golf tournament. And certainly we're all in sport, so whatever type of sport tournament that you want to host. Some golf, especially if you have a celebrity golf tournament, depending on the nature of the program that you're running, you can raise $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 and have that on an annual basis. It's also really important that the organization is innovative and agile and flexible. So the world continues to change. There continues to be more problems. The local community that your program is embedded in will have new ministers that you're going to have to meet with, new principals, new phys ed people, maybe new issues that you can link together with your initial educational problem that you were trying to address within the context of your program. But the idea is that you can't stay static. The organization and the mindset within the organization needs to be really broad in that you're always looking at how you need to change to address the issues at hand within your Sport for Development program. The third type of sustainability that Lindsay highlights is community sustainability. Here, this is really what you need to look at the very, very beginning of your program, to look at what types of skills, abilities, knowledge, facilities, resources are available in the community. So as someone, and we talked about this earlier, the global north, do we really want to be bringing everything down to the global south and telling them how they should run their school system or their program? The answer is absolutely not. So what you want to be doing is finding out, what local practices are and what resources are available, and it should be local people who decide what they need and what the program should look like and how best to tackle that challenge. So to go back to Turks and Caicos, years in advance, they realized that they had a very high dropout rate among the children in the school, and the rugby club met with the schools and talked to them and said, can we help you with this? Right? So it wasn't the rugby club making a judgment. So I think really importantly, it's that local community resources, skills, individuals who are already there, and tapping into those local networks and seeing what you can do to assist, not the other way around. The second one, and this is maybe part of the first, is really that cultural acceptance. Any type of And I think this is why a lot of Sport for Development programs, they don't bring leaders over from Canada. Okay, what they do is they train local leaders, because you want that knowledge to stay in the community. You don't want to train all kinds of kids from Canada, bring them down there and then leave. The idea is that you're training local individuals how to run the program, and then that's what makes it sustainable. Now, we're going to have a bit of a chat in a lecture that talks about the advantages and disadvantages of using local leaders. So there are times when bringing people down from Canada or the UK or somewhere else who has some knowledge in a particular area can be really useful. But you just need to be really mindful of that cultural sensitivity whenever you're thinking about going into a community, because you want that community to embrace your program and be sustainable. Ideally, you would start that program and then you would leave, right? And the idea is that you would have taught everybody, enough that they needed to run the program and those skills, and then you can walk out, and that program is sustainable in and of itself because of the community resources that are there. And the final one, we kind of touched on this earlier, is establishing those partnerships in the community. So you don't want to be isolated. You need to make sure that you are meeting and working with a diversity of people within every level of the community. So maybe it's a school program that you're running, but as I mentioned, I was dealing with the Minister of Education. Okay, so we weren't just dealing with the phys ed teachers and the head of phys ed for the schools. We were dealing with multiple different stakeholders in the community. So all three of those different levels really go together to helping to complement or bring about community sustainability for your Sport for Development and Peace program. The true key to sustainability of a Sport for Development program is institutional sustainability. So it is really unlocked if you have successfully achieved the other three, the individual, community, and organizational levels of sustainability within the community. So the institutional sustainability means that there are policies and programs and sustained funding sources in the community that are there even after maybe the person who founded that organization leaves. So I hate to go back to Turks and Caicos too many times, but when we met with the woman who was redoing the entire school curriculum, and she said that she would put rugby in the curriculum, the permanent curriculum for the school, I knew we had a policy change. I knew that the work that had been going on for years and years before I even got there had planted enough seeds in the community, in the school, with the local ministers, right? And enough recognition at all of these other levels that then when this woman heard about it, she said, you need to be, this rugby needs to be on the school's permanent curriculum. And she also really valued the fact that our program had young women and men, and that some of the other programs that were offered in the school in the Turks were more geared towards the male students. So that's the institutional sustainability. That's when there's a line item in the budget for the government that goes towards sport. When they hire a permanent Sport for Development coordinator who operates not only in rugby, but using other sports to achieve development. It's when you develop a sport tourism program where you're doing economic development by hosting sport events. And it was interesting when we had our final rugby festival day. It was so excited. They flew kids in. Oh my God, we had hundreds of kids. We had so many kids that wanted to participate that they didn't have enough phys ed teachers, and so our students ended up coaching the teams, and of course the students were like bidding for our students, and there's a bit of a ruckus when there's a couple students that were really popular anyway, it was the early morning and we were there. We were 5 o'clock in the morning. We all got up to set up because we had streamers that we put all around the fences and signage, and we had booths set up around all of our development messages that we were trying to share with the students and with the community. And these men and women started setting up these booths all around, the rugby field. And we had hot dogs and drinks and all kinds of things for the kids to eat throughout the day. day, and the SPEMA students came over and they said, you know, Professor Cousins, they said, you know, are we going to allow that? Are we going to have these people, you know, selling this food when we have food for the kids? And for me, I thought, this is amazing. This is going to be this rugby festival will be an institution now, because people all over the community that we didn't talk to are coming to our event to build local development, economic development, because they're selling food and drinks to these kids that we've brought in for this tournament. So that's the institutional development, where year after year people come and participate in your event because they're making money off of it, or their organization is benefiting from it. And it was interesting, we were in the car, I can't remember where we were coming from, we're in the car, and I think it was some students and our grad student Ryan, and there was this basketball game going on, and all kinds of people were sitting in the stands. And so I said, like, pull over, I want to go find out what this, you know, basketball is all about, because there were so many people there. And so as soon as, you know, hate to say it, a white woman, you know, gets out of a car and, you know, goes over, you know, right away the coach came over, and, you know, I just said, hi, I'm Laura Cousins, I'm from Brock University, and I'm just here because I think it's really fantastic that you have so many kids not only playing basketball, but here, you know, watching the basketball game. And he said, really? I said, yeah, I think this is really terrific. And I said, we're here, you know, with rugby, and our goal is to try to, you know, encourage the kids to stay in school through these after-school tutoring programs and messaging, female empowerment, etc. And he said, will you come and work with our basketball program? And so we exchanged information, and we still keep in touch since then. And then we tried to involve them in this broader goal that we had around sport tourism and economic development. Now, COVID obviously put a big anchor in our sport tourism plans that we had. Maybe we'll reinvigorate them for next year. But it's those types of programs that last, right? Where the people in the community are seeing this broader view and perspective of what can happen, and they're making it happen. It's not you making it happen. And it's where there's those line items, and they didn't have a branch for sport tourism, even though tourism and sport are huge in the Turks and Caicos Islands, but they haven't combined the two in terms of, you know, this is part of our economic development, and it's a matter of just, you know, meeting with them a couple of times and planting some of those ideas, and then they run with that. So, you know, those are the kinds of ideas that really percolate along in the community, and the longer they last, and then once they do become part of government policy or practical application that's done by practitioners all the time, but not that we've driven because they've driven it, then you know that you have institutionalized this program that you've started within the broader context of the society. Thanks for making it to the end of our 4 pillars of Lindsay's framework sustainability today. And so there's 2 key areas that you're going to use this information in the course. Hopefully you'll use it more broadly than that. The first one is when you're doing your critique of a sport for development organization, use these 4 areas of sustainability and see if they actually have them. All right, so that would be number 1. And the second one, when you're designing your own sport for development program, make sure that it encompasses all 4 levels of sustainability, remembering that it's that 4th one of institutional sustainability that's going to be challenging but doable. So I'm really looking forward to seeing your work in the future, and I hope you enjoyed learning about sustainability today.